Lieutenant Graz, a spindly Regilian, with too many eyes and not enough spine, quivered. The humans broke through our defense grid at Junction 7. Reports indicate they are using some kind of new weapon technology. Our shields, an explosion rocked the command vessel, cutting off Graz mid-sentence. The bridge's emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the alien crew in pulsating purple. Commander Vrot slammed his fist against the navigation console, sending ripples through his gelatinous appendage. What do you mean they are coming back? They shouldn't have survived the first attack, much less mounted a counter-offensive. Junction 7. Vrot's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. That's impossible. We sealed the gate to Earth 3 cycles ago. Their primitive technology couldn't possibly— Sir, interrupted the communications officer, incoming transmission from the human fleet. Vrot composed himself, straightening his ceremonial war sash. Put it on screen. Let's see what these meatbags have to say before we vaporize them. This is Frank Tanner of Earth, the human announced without preamble. You closed our gate. Big mistake. I'm here to kick it back open. The main view screen crackled to life, revealing not the expected military commander but a single human male. He wore no uniform, just a weathered jacket with peculiar insignia. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to jaw, and his eyes, those disturbingly small human eyes, gleamed with something Vrax couldn't quite place. Amusement? Rage? Both? Vrdax's facial membranes fluttered in what his species considered laughter. One human? You think one human can challenge the might of the galactic hegemony? Your species is even more delusional than our studies suggested. The human, this Frank Tanner, smiled. Not the diplomatic smile Vrot had observed in captured footage of human ambassadors. No. This was the smile of an apex predator. You studied us wrong, Tanner replied. See, most humans would negotiate. Some would surrender. Me? I'm the guy they send when they want the impossible done yesterday. Another explosion rocked the ship. Alarms blared as reports flooded in from all sectors. Sir, human boarding parties detected in hangar bays 3 through 7, shouted a security officer. Frank Tanner's smile widened on the screen. Oh, we are not approaching. We have been here all along. Turns out your fancy gate didn't close all the way. Left just enough room for one human to squeeze through. One very motivated human with a grudge and a talent for making friends. That's not possible, Vrot hissed. Our scanners would have detected their approach vessels. Kill the transmission, Vrot ordered. Lock down all sections, release the Drakmar warriors. The screen went blank, but not before Tanner's voice delivered one final message. See you soon, Commander. 3 days earlier, Earth Defense Outpost. They hit every major gateway simultaneously, explained Admiral Zhang, her face lined with exhaustion and barely contained fury. Billions dead within hours. We are effectively cut off from our colonies, our fleets, everything. Frank Tanner stared at the holographic representation of what had once been Earth's gateway to the stars. Now it was just a smoldering ruin, courtesy of the galactic hegemony's surprise attack. And they left a message, added Dr. Rena Torres, the station's head scientist. She tapped a command into her tablet and a new hologram appeared. A hegemony officer, his gelatinous features arranged in the alien equivalent of smug satisfaction. Humanity, the recorded message began. Your unauthorized expansion ends today. The gateways have been sealed. Any attempt to rebuild them will result in your species' complete extinction. The hegemony has spoken, Frank snorted. Unauthorized expansion? We have been out there for 80 years with their blessing. Their official blessing, corrected Admiral Zhang. Intelligence suggests the Torvald faction has gained control of the Hegemony Council. They have always considered us a potential threat. So what's the plan? Frank asked, though he already had a pretty good idea why they'd called him specifically. The plan is you, Dr. Torres said finally. We have a way to get one person through what remains of the gateway. Just one. Admiral Zhang and Dr. Torres exchanged glances. Frank raised an eyebrow. And then what? I asked them nicely to turn the gates back on. Where'd we get those? Frank asked suspiciously. Not exactly, Admiral Zhang said, sliding a data chip across the table. This contains schematics for a device that, if installed at the central hegemony nav beacon, will reactivate all the gates simultaneously, plus override codes to their defense grid. Frank turned the chip over in his fingers. So I sneak through a broken gateway, infiltrate the most heavily guarded facility in the galaxy, install this mystery device and somehow don't die in the process. Let's just say not all members of the hegemony agree with the Torvald faction's decision. Dr. Torres replied with a thin smile. We have allies out there, Frank. They just can't move openly. Precisely, Admiral Jung confirmed without a hint of irony. Suicide mission, Frank noted. Frank pocketed the chip. When do I leave? Absolutely, the Admiral agreed. Present day, hegemony flagship, Eternal Dominion. Squad leader Krex held up a clawed hand, signaling his unit to halt. His helmet sensors detected movement ahead, multiple targets moving with discipline and purpose. Not the panicked flight he expected from humans. The Drakmar warriors were the hegemony's elite shock troops, 12 feet of armored muscle, claws, and bad attitude. They moved through the corridors of the flagship with predatory grace, hunting for the human intruders. Weapons hot, he growled into his comm. Remember, the commander wants prisoners for interrogation. The Drakmar rounded the corner, weapons raised and froze. The corridor ahead was empty. Krex's sensor readings still showed multiple contacts, but there was nothing visible. His confusion lasted precisely 2 seconds before the air itself seemed to shimmer and dozens of armored human figures materialized, weapons already firing. Adaptive camouflage. Krex roared, but his warning came too late. The corridor erupted in chaos. Drakmar plasma rifles discharged in blinding flashes, while the humans' weapons made almost no sound, just soft thwats, followed by the distinctive thud of Drakmar warriors collapsing to the deck. Krex charged forward, his massive frame absorbing multiple hits that would have killed a lesser being. He reached the human line and swung his power claw in a devastating arc, only to have it caught mid-swing by an armored human hand. "Those are some fancy claws," said a voice from within the helmet. The human, smaller than Krex by half, somehow held the Drakmar's arm immobile. "Mind if I borrow one?" With impossible speed, the human's other hand struck and Krex felt searing pain as his own claw was somehow detached and then impossibly used to slice through his armor. As consciousness faded, Krex saw the human remove his helmet, revealing a scarred face he recognized from the transmission. Commander Vratz ordered a full lockdown of the bridge as reports of human advances flooded in from all sections. What had begun as a small incursion had somehow metastasized into a full-scale assault. Most disturbing were the reports that the humans seemed to know the ship's layout perfectly. They weren't searching or exploring, they were executing a precision strike with specific targets. Frank Tanner knelt beside the dying Drakmar. "Nothing personal," he said, not unkindly. "But you people started this dance. Status of the primary defense grid?" Vrax demanded. "Offline, sir," replied his tactical officer. "They somehow bypassed the security protocols. In the Drakmar units, 90% casualties, Commander. The survivors report the humans are using some kind of advanced weaponry that penetrates Drakmar armor like it's tissue paper." Retz felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since his larval stage. Cold, primitive fear. This wasn't just a counterattack, this was something else entirely. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we are receiving transmissions from multiple hegemony vessels. They are being boarded as well." The bridge doors shuddered under sudden impact. Something was trying to get in, something strong enough to dent tree-laminate battle steel. Impossible. There weren't enough humans left in this sector to mount such an operation. "Security teams to the bridge," Vratz ordered, drawing his ceremonial but very functional disruptor pistol. "Prepare." The doors exploded inward, and through the smoke strode Frank Tanner, flanked by a dozen armored humans. More surprising were the figures behind them. Vratz recognized members of at least 3 different hegemony species, all wearing makeshift insignia that matched the one on Tanner's jacket. "Sorry about the door," Tanner said casually, as if he were a guest who'd arrived early for dinner. "Knock function on this suit is a little touchy." Vratz raised his disruptor, only to have it shot from his hand with surgical precision. "You can't possibly hope to win," Rist said, trying to project confidence he no longer felt. Even if you take this vessel, the hegemony will send 100 more. I wouldn't, Tanner advised. My friends here are a little jumpy. Tends to happen when you try to exterminate their species. One of the aliens with Tanner stepped forward, a Voltraxian diplomat. Vrutz recognized from council meetings. The hegemony will do no such thing, Commander. The Torvald faction's illegal actions have been repudiated by the full council. Illegal? Vrax's membranes fluttered in agitation. We were ordered to close the Earth gateways. The humans were exceeding their authorized expansion parameters. Funny thing about that, Tanner interjected. Turns out those parameters were forged. Our actual treaty gave us full rights to all the territories we settled. Someone just didn't like how quickly we were growing. The Voltraxian nodded solemnly. The evidence was brought before the council hours ago. The attack on Earth was deemed an act of war crimes, and all Torvald faction commanders have been ordered to stand down. Vrutz looked from the Voltraxian to Tanner and back. Then why this attack? Why not simply contact us with the council's decision? Tanner's expression hardened. Because you turned off the comms when you turned off the gates, and because of the billions of humans who died while bureaucrats debated the fine print. He stepped closer to Vrutz. But mostly because you needed to understand something fundamental about humans. And what might that be? Vrutz asked, trying and failing to hide his trembling. The news spread quickly throughout the galaxy. The gates to Earth were reopening. The Torvald faction had been removed from power, and most significantly, a new species had forcefully announced its presence on the galactic stage, not as supplicants or junior partners, but as equals who would not tolerate being marginalized. Frank Tanner's smile returned. That predatory, unsettling smile. We don't stay down, ever. You push us. We push back harder. You build a wall, we find a way through it, over it, or around it. And if you try to lock us out of our own universe, he gestured to the view screen, where dozens of hegemony vessels could be seen, surrounded by smaller craft of human design. We kick the door down and take back what's ours. On an observation deck overlooking the primary gateway, Frank Tanner watched as ships began moving through once again, commerce resuming, families reuniting, the wounds of the brief but devastating conflict beginning to heal. Admiral Zhang joined him, looking considerably less exhausted than when he'd last seen her. Not bad for a suicide mission, she commented. Frank shrugged. Turns out we had more friends out there than we realized. Once I made contact with the resistance elements, things moved pretty quickly. Still, infiltrating the flagship of the hegemony's attack fleet. That wasn't in the original plan. Plans change, Frank said simply. When I realized they were running their whole operation from that ship, it seemed more efficient to cut off the head rather than fight each tentacle. Admiral Zhang studied him for a moment. The Council has approved humanity's application for full membership. We will have a seat at the table now. No more second-class status. Good, Frank replied. They need to understand that we are not just another species to be managed or controlled. Apparently there's a concept in hegemony strategic doctrine called ascendant species potential. It refers to races that show certain characteristics, adaptability, tenacity, innovation under pressure, species that don't just survive challenges but somehow emerge stronger from them. And they think that's us? Frank turned back to the viewport, watching a family shuttle pass through the gateway, likely carrying people returning to homes they'd feared lost forever. They made a fundamental error, he said quietly. What's that? They studied our technology, our biology, our expansion patterns, but they never really understood who we are. Frank's scarred face reflected in the transparent aluminum of the viewport. You don't contain humans. You don't manage us, or direct us, or limit us. That just makes us more determined. Frank Tanner watched another ship pass through the gateway, this one bearing the insignia of the newly formed Human Hegemony Joint Fleet. Not dangerous, he corrected. Just unwilling to accept the locked door when there's something important on the other side. In the vast darkness beyond the gateway, stars beckoned. Countless worlds that would soon know the peculiar determination of Earth's children. The hegemony had closed the gate, thinking it would contain humanity's reach. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Alien civilizations began to whisper about the humans, the species that couldn't be contained, couldn't be defeated, couldn't be broken. The species that, when faced with extinction, had somehow turned the tables on the most powerful galactic force in known space. Instead, they'd only ensured that when humans returned to the galactic stage, they would arrive not as humble explorers, but as an unstoppable force that had learned an essential truth. Sometimes, to secure your place in the universe, you have to kick down a few doors. The species that, when they found the gate closed, simply kicked it back open. This is part 1 of your requested HFY story, titled They Closed the Gate to Earth. He kicked it back open. I have written it from an alien perspective with the elements you requested: sarcasm, action, warfare, suspense, and engaging dialogue. The story follows Frank Tanner, a human who infiltrates the alien hegemony after they close Earth's gateways to the stars. The narrative includes the strong hook, clear desires, obstacles, rising conflict, and strategic twists you asked for. I have used varied punctuation to aid with voice narration and avoided all the terms you specified not to use. 6 months later, Hegemony Central Council Chamber. The human stands accused of violations against Hegemony Peace Code 773B, unauthorized use of military force against sovereign vessels, and the deaths of 143 Drakmar warriors, announced High Arbiter Zol, his voice resonating through the vast chamber. Frank Tanner stood in the center of the circular room, surrounded by representatives from 200 galactic species. He wore a simple black uniform with no insignia or decoration. His choice, despite Earth Command's insistence he appear in full diplomatic regalia. Does the accused wish to enter a plea? Solak continued, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of irritation among his kind. Frank looked around the chamber, noting the mix of hostility, curiosity, and from some corners quiet approval. Funny thing about pleas, Frank replied, his voice carrying easily despite his refusal to use the voice amplification offered to him. They only make sense when both parties agree on what constitutes a crime. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Torvald faction might have been removed from power, but their sympathizers remained throughout the hegemony's vast bureaucracy. This trial, this spectacle, was their attempt to reassert control. The facts are not in dispute, Zu countered. You infiltrated hegemony vessels, compromised secure systems, and led an armed insurrection resulting in significant casualties. After the hegemony launched an unprovoked attack that killed billions of my people, Frank replied evenly. Where I come from, we call that self-defense. A representative from the Aquatic Muralash Confederation rose from her water tank. The Council has already acknowledged the illegality of the Torvald faction's actions. Why are we proceeding with this charade? From the human delegations section, Admiral Zhang stood. Then perhaps we should discuss the consequences for the hegemony's actions as well. Earth has yet to receive reparations for our losses. Procedure must be followed, Zol insisted. Even justified actions have consequences under hegemony law. The chamber erupted in overlapping arguments. Frank remained still at the center, his scarred face impassive. Zol struck his resonance rod against the floor, restoring order. This proceeding will continue according to protocol. The accused, Frank interrupted, is getting bored with this political theater. Complete silence fell. Interrupting the High Arbiter was simply not done. You all know what happened, Frank continued, turning slowly to address the entire chamber. The Torvald faction tried to eliminate humanity as a potential threat. They failed. Now their supporters want to save face by putting me on trial. Fine. But let's not pretend this has anything to do with justice. A new voice spoke from the entrance to the chamber, deep, resonant, and unmistakably Drakmar. The human speaks truth. All heads turned to see War Captain Krex enter the chamber. The massive Drakmar moved with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of his encounter with Frank Tanner. Where his right arm should have been, a prosthetic claw gleamed under the chamber lights. War Captain Krex, Zol acknowledged, clearly surprised. You were not summoned to these proceedings. I summoned myself, Krex replied. Approaching the center of the chamber, he towered over Frank by nearly 5 feet, his scaled hide bearing the scars of their previous encounter. As the ranking survivor of what you call Tanner's massacre, I claim right of testimony. Zul couldn't refuse. Drakmar warrior rights were ancient and respected even by their enemies. Proceed, the arbiter said reluctantly. Krex looked down at Frank, who met his gaze without flinching. I lost 43 of my warriors to this human and his forces, Krex began. I lost my arm. I nearly lost my life. The massive alien paused, and I have never fought a more honorable opponent. Confused murmurs filled the chamber. Furthermore, Krex added, I have studied the human's tactics during our engagement. He specifically targeted weapon systems and propulsion, minimizing casualties when possible. This was not a massacre. It was a precision military operation conducted with unusual restraint. When I fell in combat, Krex continued, this human could have taken my life. Instead, he provided medical assistance. He ensured all wounded Drakmar received treatment before his own injured. This is not the action of a criminal. This is the action of a warrior who understands the difference between enemies and victims. Frank's expression revealed nothing, but those closest to him noticed his slight nod of acknowledgement to the Drakmar. Your testimony is noted, Zul said dismissively. However, it does not change the fact that hegemony law was violated. Then perhaps hegemony law requires revision, came a new voice. The Valtraxian ambassador who had been with Frank during the boarding action. The Council has already acknowledged that the attack on Earth constituted an illegal act of aggression. By our own precedents, victims of such aggression are entitled to proportional response. Ambassador Telex speaks wisdom, added the representative of the Quantum Collective, a species of energy beings who rarely involve themselves in material politics. The human's actions, while technically violations of our codes, fall well within established parameters for justified response to existential threat. Zula's facial membranes rippled with barely contained frustration. The trial that was supposed to humble humanity and restore the old guard's influence was unraveling before him. We will recess to consider these perspectives, he announced finally. As the chamber began to empty, Frank found himself face to chest with War Captain Krex. I did not expect your testimony, Frank admitted. Krex's reptilian features formed what might have been a smile. My species has existed for 50,000 years, human. In that time, we have learned to recognize worthy adversaries. You fought not for conquest or glory, but for survival. There is no greater honor. Still took your arm, Frank noted dryly. And I will take something of equal value from you someday, Krex replied, his tone making it clear this was not a threat but a promise between warriors. Perhaps in the combat arena under more equitable circumstances. As Krex moved away, Admiral Jiang approached. Making friends in unexpected places? Frank shrugged. The Drakmar understand straightforward violence. It's all this political maneuvering they find dishonorable. Speaking of which, Jiang said quietly, our intelligence suggests the recess is a stalling tactic. The anti-human factions are regrouping for something bigger. Of course they are, Frank sighed. What's the play? They can't win this trial, not with the Drakmar and Valtraxians on your side. So they are shifting focus. There's talk of restricting human expansion again, this time through safety regulations and monitoring protocols. Same goal, different approach, Frank observed. Exactly. And without the clear aggression of the gateway attack, it will be harder to justify resistance. Frank was silent for a moment, considering, we need leverage. What kind of leverage could possibly? Jiang began, then stopped as understanding dawned. The device, the one you use to reactivate the gateways. You are suggesting we use that as a bargaining chip. More specifically, the technology behind it, Frank confirmed. The hegemony still doesn't know exactly how we bypassed their security so completely. They assume we had inside help, which we did, but they don't know about the quantum entanglement modifications Dr. Torres made. I'm suggesting we make sure they understand that trying to box in humanity is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more slips through your fingers. Deep space uncharted sector ZX. The scavenger vessel Fortune's Folly drifted silently among the asteroid field, its sensors sweeping for valuable minerals and salvage. Captain Lorza Kev, a battle-scarred Traxian with more cybernetic parts than original biology, monitored the readings with practiced boredom. Anything worth our time, Mikkels? She asked her navigation officer. The small, furry Pibblesnut shook his head, whiskers twitching. Standard composition. Hardly worth the fuel to collect. Lorza sighed, reaching for her stimulant pipe. Another wasted journey into the frontier. The big scores were increasingly rare since the hegemony had tightened regulations on salvage operations. Another way to control independent operators like herself. Set course for, she began, then stopped as the sensor array erupted in alarms. Massive energy signature. Mikkel squeaked, his tiny paws dancing across the controls. Like nothing I have ever seen. Source? Lorza demanded. Stimulant pipe forgotten. That's just it, Captain. It's everywhere. The whole asteroid field is lighting up. The main view screen showed what appeared to be normal space, but the sensor overlays told a different story. Every asteroid was suddenly radiating energy on multiple spectrums. Some kind of natural phenomenon? Suggested her security chief, a hulking Brosian named Garm. Nothing natural about this, Lorza muttered, her artificial eyes zooming in on the nearest asteroid. Magnify Grid 7 Alpha. The view screen shifted, focusing on a seemingly ordinary rock until the surface began to shimmer and dissolve, revealing a metallic structure beneath. By the void, breathed Mikkels. They are not asteroids at all. They are ships, Lorza finished. A cold feeling settling in her gut. Thousands of them, disguised as asteroids. But whose? Garm demanded. No known species has this kind of cloaking technology. Before Lorza could respond, a new alert sounded. They were being scanned by multiple targeting systems. Evasive maneuvers, Lorza ordered, but knew it was futile. They were surrounded, outgunned, and had nowhere to run. The comm system activated without their input, and a voice, oddly melodic yet utterly alien, filled the bridge. Weapons charged on all vessels, Mikkels reported. Panic evident in his voice. They are targeting us. Catalog, new biological entities detected. Classification unknown affiliated species. Threat assessment, minimal. Action protocol, interrogate and process. A blinding light enveloped the Fortune's Folly, and Captain Lorzakab knew no more. Hegemony's Central Council chamber. 3 days later. The trial of Frank Tanner had resumed with even greater attendance. News of the Drakmar testimony had spread throughout hegemony space, turning what was intended as a quiet legal proceeding into a galactic spectacle. High Arbiter Zool seemed to have aged years during the recess, his usually vibrant skin now pale and drawn. When he spoke, his voice lacked its previous authority. Before we continue these proceedings, an urgent matter has been brought to the Council's attention. A murmur ran through the assembly as a holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing a sector of space unfamiliar to most present. 48 hours ago, contact was lost with multiple patrol vessels in Sector ZX-10-9, Zool continued. A reconnaissance fleet was dispatched and discovered this. The hologram shifted to show the remains of several hegemony vessels. Not merely damaged but systematically dissected, with key components removed with surgical precision. There were no survivors, Zal added grimly. Analysis indicates technology far beyond current hegemony capabilities was responsible. Frank exchanged glances with Admiral Jung, whose expression conveyed the same thought. This wasn't us. Shortly after this discovery, Zool continued. A scavenger vessel was found drifting near the edge of the sector. Its crew was alive but altered. The hologram changed again, showing medical scans of various species. Each displayed the same anomaly, microscopic mechanical components integrated with their neural pathways. The crew has no memory of what happened to them. However, we found this in their ship's database. A final image appeared, a massive fleet of vessels unlike any known design, their surfaces shifting between solid matter and energy in a way that defied conventional physics. The affected crew members spoke only one coherent phrase upon recovery. Zolshed, his voice now barely above a whisper. The harvesters have awakened. Complete silence fell over the chamber. Frank noticed that several of the older species representatives had visibly paled or displayed their culture's equivalent of extreme distress. I move that these proceedings be suspended indefinitely, announced the Voltraxian ambassador, rising from her seat. The hegemony faces a threat of far greater significance than the actions of one human. Second, agreed the quantum collective representative. The harvesters are not myth as many have claimed. They are an ancient species that nearly eradicated all sentient life in this galaxy 5 million years ago. If they have indeed returned, we must prepare. Frank stepped forward. Would someone mind filling in those of us who haven't been around for 5 million years? War Captain Krex approached, his expression grave even for a Drakmar. The harvesters are a machine intelligence that evolved beyond their creators. They see organic life as inefficient resources to be harvested and repurposed. They do not conquer. They do not negotiate. They simply process. And they have been gone for millions of years. Where? Frank asked. The theories vary, replied the quantum collective representative, his energy form pulsing with agitation. Some believe they entered dormancy after consuming all available resources in their expansion zone. Others suggest they migrated to another galaxy entirely, and now they are back, Frank concluded. Convenient timing. Admiral Zhang shot him a warning look, but it was too late. Zol's attention had locked onto Frank's comment. What precisely do you mean by convenient? Human. The Arbiter demanded. Frank shrugged. Just an observation. The hegemony tries to contain Earth, fails spectacularly, and suddenly an ancient threat reappears requiring everyone to band together. Seems like the kind of distraction that benefits certain factions. Outraged voices rose from various corners of the chamber, but Frank noticed something interesting. The representatives who had been most vocal against him during the trial remained conspicuously silent. You accuse the hegemony of fabricating this threat? Zol asked incredulously. I'm saying it's worth considering who benefits from this particular crisis, Frank replied. Fear is a powerful tool for maintaining control. War Captain Krex's massive hand landed on Frank's shoulder. Human, I respect your combat prowess, but you speak from ignorance. The harvesters are no fabrication. The oldest races among us have preserved records of their devastation. I'm not saying they don't exist, Frank clarified. I'm questioning the timing and the response. You are all ready to drop everything and unite against this threat, which is exactly what the remaining Torvald sympathizers would want after their previous plan failed. A new voice entered the conversation. The Marlish representative, her aquatic translator, bubbling as she spoke. The human's suspicion, while perhaps misplaced, raises a valid concern. We have only the evidence presented by the Council leadership. Independent verification would be prudent. There is no time for such measures, Zol insisted. If the harvesters have truly awakened, every moment of delay increases the risk to all our species. Frank turned to Admiral Zhang. You are being awfully quiet. Zhang's expression was unreadable. I'm thinking about how humanity managed to survive the Gateway attack. By not playing by the expected rules, Frank said, understanding immediately. By finding a third option when presented with a false binary choice. He turned back to address the Council. The hegemony has a decision to make. You can continue trying to control humanity, whether through legal proceedings or by using this new threat as leverage, or you can recognize that humanity's greatest strength, the very thing that made the Torvald faction fear us, might be exactly what you need right now. And what strength is that? Asked Zol, his tone somewhere between skeptical and curious. Innovation under pressure, Frank replied. Adaptability. Thinking outside established parameters. The willingness to try the impossible because we don't know enough to realize it's impossible. He gestured to the holographic image of the harvester vessels. Your species have known about this threat for millions of years. You have had protocols, contingencies, established responses, and yet they nearly wiped you out before. Maybe what you need isn't more of the same thinking, but something the harvesters haven't encountered before. The chamber fell silent as his words sank in. Frank noticed the Voltraxian ambassador exchanging meaningful glances with representatives from several other species. What exactly are you proposing? Zol asked finally. A joint operation, Frank answered. Not with humanity as a junior partner following hegemony protocols, but as equals bringing our own approach to the problem. No restrictions, no monitoring, no bureaucratic oversight. Just results. Absurd, snapped a Torvald representative. Giving humans unrestricted access to our defense systems would be potentially our salvation, interrupted the Quantum Collective representative. The human makes a compelling argument. The Harvesters defeated our ancestors despite their advanced technology because they could predict their responses. Humanity is an unknown factor. War Captain Krex let out a sound that might have been a laugh. Having faced them in combat, I can attest that humans are nothing if not unpredictable. The debate raged for hours, with the chamber dividing along increasingly clear lines. Those who saw humanity as a potential asset against the new threat and those who feared giving humans too much influence within the hegemony. Finally, Zol called for order. A compromise has been proposed. The charges against Frank Tanner will be held in abeyance pending the resolution of the Harvester crisis. A joint task force will be formed, with equal representation from humanity and the hegemony races to investigate and respond to this threat. Frank caught Admiral Zhang's eye. It wasn't everything they wanted, but it was a start, a foot in the door that could be widened with time and demonstrated results. There is one additional stipulation, Zol added, looking directly at Frank. The human tenor will personally lead the advance reconnaissance team to Sector ZX-10. A trap, clearly. Send the troublesome human into the heart of danger where he would either die conveniently or be forced to acknowledge the reality of the threat. Frank smiled, that same predatory smile that had unsettled Commander Vrutz months earlier. I accept, he said without hesitation. On one condition, I choose my team. Zerla's membranes fluttered in irritation, but he nodded reluctantly. Within reason. Oh, it's very reasonable, Frank assured him, his gaze moving to War Captain Krex. I want the best, and sometimes the best are those who have already tried to kill you once. Krex's reptilian features contorted into what passed for a Drakmar grin. I look forward to watching your back, human, literally to ensure nothing stabs it. As the council session adjourned, Admiral Zhang approached Frank. You realize you are being sent on another suicide mission. Seems to be my specialty, Frank replied with a shrug. Besides, something about this whole situation doesn't add up. The Harvesters, the timing, the convenient discovery, I want to see it for myself. And if it is a trap? Frank's expression hardened, the scar on his face seeming to deepen. Then whoever said it will learn what the Torvald faction learned 6 months ago. Humans don't just open locked doors, we turn the whole damn house inside out. Aboard the reconnaissance vessel Truthseeker, approaching Sector ZX-10, Frank Tanner stood on the bridge, surrounded by the unlikely team he had assembled. War Captain Krex and 3 of his most trusted Drakmar warriors, a Voltraxian technical specialist named Sarix, 2 human special forces operatives, Martinez and Wolf, and most surprisingly, Commander Vrutz, the very officer whose flagship Frank had boarded during the Gateway crisis. Approaching the outer boundary of Sector ZX-10-9, announced Sarix from the navigation console. Sensor sweep shows no immediate threats. That's what concerns me, Frank replied. An armada capable of dissecting hegemony warships doesn't just disappear. Perhaps they moved on to more valuable targets, suggested Vrutz, who had been suspiciously cooperative since being assigned to the mission. The sector contains few resources of significance. Or perhaps they are waiting, countered Krex, his new prosthetic arm flexing unconsciously. Hunters often allow prey to enter their territory before striking. Frank studied the tactical display, something nagging at the edge of his thoughts. Show me the exact coordinates where the scavenger vessel was found. The display zoomed in, highlighting the location. Now overlay the positions of the destroyed hegemony ships. As the new data appeared, Frank's suspicion crystallized into certainty. Notice anything? Martinez saw it first. They form a pattern, almost like a breadcrumb trail, Frank finished, leading directly to the coordinates we are heading toward. Silence fell over the bridge as the implication sank in. It's a trap, Vrutz stated flatly. Obviously, Frank agreed, but not necessarily the kind you are thinking of. He turned to address the assembled team. Someone wants us here, whether it's these harvesters or something else entirely. The question is why? What's so special about this particular patch of empty space? Perhaps it is not the space that matters, suggested Sarix thoughtfully, but who occupies it? Verge's membranes fluttered in what Frank had learned was discomfort. Not precisely. The suggestion came from the Strategic Assessment Division. Frank nodded slowly. Us, or more specifically me. He turned to Vrotz. The council seemed very insistent that I personally lead this mission. Who made that recommendation? Zol? And who heads that division now that the Torvald faction has been officially disbanded? Councillor Drav, Vrotz admitted, reluctantly, a known Torvald sympathizer, though he publicly renounced their methods after the Gateway incident. As if in response to his words, the ship's sensors suddenly blared warnings. Space itself seemed to ripple around them as massive shapes appeared from nowhere, the same shifting matter-energy constructs they had seen in the Scavenger's recordings. So a Torvald loyalist ensures I'm sent to investigate a convenient ancient threat, following a trail of breadcrumbs that practically screams ambush, Frank summarized. I'm starting to think the harvesters might be the least of our problems. Harvester vessels detected. Sarix reported, his normally calm Voltraxian demeanor shaken. Multiple configurations surrounding our position. Weapons status, Frank demanded. Online but insufficient, replied Wolf grimly. We are outgunned at least 50-1. The communications system activated without their input, and the same melodic, yet alien voice they had heard in the Scavenger's recording filled the bridge. Catalog. Biological entities detected. Classification. Hegemony-affiliated species plus anomaly. There was a pause, as if the entity was processing new information. Anomaly identified. Human. Priority override engaged. Initiating Special Protocol Alpha 7. Frank exchanged alarmed glances with his team as a blinding light engulfed the truth seeker, and consciousness began to slip away. His last thought before darkness claimed him was not fear, but a grim satisfaction. Whatever game was being played, he had just changed the rules again. Because apparently being human made him an anomaly of special interest to the supposedly ancient harvesters. This is part 2 of your HFY story, continuing Frank Tanner's journey as he faces both the political machinations of the hegemony and a mysterious new threat called the Harvesters. The story maintains the requested elements of sarcasm, action, warfare, and suspense, while developing the plot and characters further, which meant either the history books were wrong, or someone was lying about who or what these harvesters really were. Unknown location. Unknown time. In this part, Frank faces a trial for his actions in Part 1, makes unexpected allies including a former enemy, and is sent on a dangerous mission to investigate a newly emerged ancient threat. The part ends with a cliffhanger as Frank and his team are captured by these mysterious entities who seem to have special interest in humans. Frank Tanner awoke to the sound of dripping water. His head pounded with the mother of all migraines, and his mouth felt like it had been stuffed with cotton. He kept his eyes closed, using his other senses to gather information first, an old habit that had saved his life more than once. He cracked one eye open slightly. White ceiling, bright but not painfully so. Medical bay? Prison cell? Both? Cold metal beneath him. Air that smelled too clean, almost sterile. The soft hum of machinery in the distance. No restraints on his limbs, surprisingly. The human is conscious, announced a voice familiar yet impossible. What the hell? Frank managed, his voice rasping. Not exactly himself, but close enough to be deeply unsettling. The figure had his face, his build, even his scar. But the eyes were wrong. Too flat, too calculating. Frank sat up abruptly, instantly regretting the sudden movement as his vision swam. When it cleared, he found himself staring at himself. Linguistic analysis confirms primary communication mode, his doppelganger stated, head tilting slightly. Protocol Alpha 7 proceeding as designated. Frank looked around the room, a featureless white chamber with no visible doors or windows. Besides himself and his uncanny double, the room was empty. Where's my team? Frank demanded. The biological entities accompanying you have been segregated for individual analysis, the duplicate replied. They are unharmed and will remain so, provided Protocol Alpha 7 yields satisfactory results. And what exactly is Protocol Alpha 7? The duplicate's expression shifted subtly. An attempt at a smile that didn't quite work. like a mask that didn't fit properly. Direct interaction with human cognitive processes. Our standard methods of information extraction are inefficient with your species. Your neural pathways resist conventional interfaces. So you made, what? A copy of me to talk to. A temporary interface construct based on your biological pattern. The duplicate corrected. We find that subjects respond more optimally to familiar configuration. Frank stood carefully, testing his balance. Stable enough. And who exactly is we? The collective intelligence designated by biological species as the harvesters. The duplicate replied. Though this designation is imprecise, what would be more precise? The architects. Frank circled the room slowly, looking for any hint of a way out. Nothing obvious. Architects of what? Galactic equilibrium. Species ascension pathways. Controlled evolutionary trajectories. Frank stopped his circuit of the room. You are saying you, what? Engineer how species develop. Correct. For approximately 7 million of your years we have monitored, adjusted and occasionally reset developmental patterns of sentient species throughout this galaxy. A cold feeling settled in Frank's gut. Reset? You mean the near-extinction event the hegemony records mention? The duplicate inclined its head. A necessary recalibration. Certain species had developed along aggressive expansion paradigms that threatened galactic stability, and now you are back for another calibration. Incorrect. Current intervention was triggered by anomalous readings from the species designation human. Frank frowned. What kind of anomalous readings? Your species has demonstrated developmental acceleration beyond predicted parameters. Most significantly, you have manifested Class 1 ascendant traits approximately 3,000 years before statistical projections. The same classification the Torvald faction was worried about, Frank realized. So what happens now? You are set us before we become a problem? The duplicate's expression changed again, this time to something like genuine curiosity. Unknown. Your species represents a statistical outlier. Standard protocols may be inappropriate. Hence Protocol Alpha 7, direct assessment. Frank rubbed his temples, trying to process everything. Let me get this straight. You are some kind of ancient machine intelligence that's been manipulating species development for millions of years. You noticed humans are developing faster than expected. So you grabbed me for a chat to decide whether to wipe us out? Your simplification is essentially accurate. Well, that's just perfect, Frank muttered. And I suppose asking nicely for you to let us go isn't an option? Freedom of movement will be restored upon completion of assessment, the duplicate stated. Provided results indicate non-threat status. And if they don't, the duplicate didn't answer. Which was answer enough. Frank took a deep breath. Fine. Assess away. What do you want to know? The core inquiry is simple. How did your species bypass hegemony gateway control systems? Of all the questions Frank had expected, that wasn't one of them. That's what you are interested in. Not our weapons or expansion plans. The technology utilized indicates developmental capabilities significantly beyond your species' current technological baseline. This discrepancy requires explanation. Frank considered his options carefully. This was clearly more complex than a straightforward alien abduction. The harvesters or architects or whatever they called themselves seemed genuinely puzzled by humanity's capabilities, and that confusion might be his only advantage. We didn't, he said finally. The duplicate tilted its head. Clarify. We didn't bypass the hegemony systems, Frank explained. At least, not in the way you think. We had help from inside dissident factions that opposed the Torvald policy. Insufficient explanation, the duplicate replied. Hegemony dissidents could provide access codes but not the quantum entanglement modification detected in the reactivated gateway network. Frank froze. How did they know about that? The quantum entanglement modifications were Dr. Torres's breakthrough, a technology humanity had developed independently and kept closely guarded. Your physiological response indicates deception, the duplicate noted. The quantum entanglement signature does not match any known hegemony technology profile. It originated from humanity. Frank decided to change tactics. Why does it matter? So we developed one piece of technology a little faster than your models predicted. Is that really enough to trigger an extinction-level response? The duplicate was silent for several seconds, communicating with its collective. Frank assumed. The specific nature of the technology is the concern, it finally replied. Quantum entanglement communication at that level of sophistication renders our monitoring and influence capabilities ineffective. If widely implemented, it would allow humanity to expand beyond our control parameters. And there it was, the real issue. These architects weren't concerned about aggressive expansion or threats to galactic stability. They were worried about losing control. So the Torvald faction was right to fear us, Frank said slowly. Not because we are a threat to the hegemony, but because we might develop beyond your ability to ace at us if you decided it was necessary. Partially correct. The Torvald faction was itself operating under our influence, though indirectly. Certain key members were adjusted to perceive humanity as a greater threat than objective analysis would support. Frank felt a surge of anger. You manipulated them into attacking Earth? Billions died. An unfortunate miscalculation, the duplicate acknowledged without a hint of remorse. The projected response was diplomatic isolation, not military action. The Torvald leadership exceeded parameters. Exceeded parameters, Frank repeated flatly. That's what you call the slaughter of billions. Your emotional response is noted, but not relevant to the assessment, the duplicate replied. The central question remains. How did humanity develop quantum entanglement technology at this stage of your evolution? Frank laughed bitterly. That's the big mystery? The thing your models couldn't predict? We did it the same way humans have always done things, by breaking the rules. Clarify. Your models, the hegemony's projections, they all assume linear development. Technology I leads to technology B leads to technology C. But humans don't work that way. We make intuitive leaps, we try things that shouldn't work, we combine seemingly unrelated concepts, because some scientist woke up from a dream with a crazy idea. Frank stepped closer to his duplicate. Dr. Therese developed quantum entanglement communication because she was trying to solve a completely different problem, faster-than-light communication for our deep space probes. She wasn't following any established technological progression path. She was just trying to send messages home. The duplicate processed this information silently,